Hey everybody, Kuru Paul here. Welcome to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the recent sale of our condo in Mexico and how one small detail almost cost us our capital gains exemption. Now, I have a lot to cover in the video, so you might want to get something to drink and settle in. And I know that some viewers may be curious what the requirements are to get a capital gains exemption on real estate in Mexico, so I'm going to start right there. I'm going to be using this term capital gains throughout the video because that's a term that most viewers will be familiar with. More specifically, I'm going to be talking about the tax that's called Impuesto sobre la Renta, or just ISR for short. It's an income tax, and on the sale of real estate, it can be calculated in a couple of ways. You can pay 25% of the gross amount of the property without any deductions, or you can pay 35% of the net value and include deductions. Now, the net value is the difference between the original recorded property value when you bought it and what you sold it for, or your capital gains. Now, you can deduct quite a few things like property improvements, etc., but you're going to need to have official tax receipts to do that, and we call those facturas. I have a video all about the difference between notas y facturas. You might want to watch that one after this one. Well, the big one is that it's your primary residence. This is not an investment property or one that you just got, to rent on Airbnb. You actually live there. Oh, and you didn't buy it under a corporation. You either hold direct title to it in your name, or if you're in the restricted zone and can't hold direct title in your name, you at least have the bank trust or fideicomiso in your name. The other thing that's important is that you are a tax resident of Mexico. Now, there's a couple ways to be deemed a tax resident. Number one is you've established a place of residence in Mexico. Now, in our case, we don't own property in any other countries, so this one's pretty easy for us to prove. However, if you do own a home in Mexico and another country, you'll be considered a tax resident of Mexico if your center of vital interests are in Mexico, or more than 50% of your total income is derived from Mexican sources, or your primary professional activities are carried out in Mexico. The next thing that's important is you have not taken this deduction or this exemption within the last 3 years. Okay, so those are the basics. If you qualify, you can get an exemption of up to 700,000 UDI. UD what? UDI. It's an abbreviation for Unidades de Inversión, and it's a value established by the Bank of Mexico to determine certain financial debts, credits, things like that. Now, the value of a single UDI changes daily, but as of today, 700,000 UDIs would be 4,869,316 pesos, or 243,465 US dollars. That's a lot of money. That's your exemption. And if the property is in both of your names, like my name and Linda's name, we can both declare that exemption. So that is something you really want. In our case, we had owned our condo in Mexico for 6 years. It was our primary residence the entire time. We didn't own any other property in any other countries for those 6 years. My name was on all of the bills for the condo for the last 6 years. Our Mexican bank account had listed that address as our primary address for the last 6 years. We were careful to make sure that we had all of this paperwork in order so we could get that capital gains exemption, when the day came that we finally decided to sell. Now, by this point in the video, and after I've told you all this, you might be thinking, well, that all sounds pretty good, Paul, so what's the problem? What went wrong? Well, now enters the unknown variable in all of these types of transactions, and it is the notary, or notaría in Spanish. Now, notaries in Mexico are not like notaries in the US, where someone just verifies the ID of someone before they sign an important document. In Mexico, the notaries are much, much more. I'm going to be doing a video all about notaries in the future, but for the purposes of this video, all you have to know is that in real estate deals, they are solely responsible for interpreting the laws and withholding the taxes due. They are handling everything, and they are all powerful. The problem is that those interpretations of the law and how to apply it are not uniform across the board. One notary could look at some documents and determine, hey, you know what, this person qualifies for the tax exemption. And another notary down the road could look at the same documents and say, nope, the person doesn't qualify, they owe us taxes. Notaries will also differ on some other really important aspects. For example, some notaries will only allow people with permanent residency or citizens to earn that exemption. Temporary residents are denied, but other notaries will allow people with temporary residency to get the exemption. There's just no uniformity at all. Also, some notaries will require that the person lived at the property for at least 3 years prior to applying for the exemption, while others will just look to see if the exemption was claimed within the preceding 3 years for some other property. Now, those are just some of the common issues that come up. But in my case, I discovered a new one that I had never heard of before. Now, before I get into the details of my particular case, you're probably already wondering how you can avoid this happening in your situation. It's simple. Do your homework and carefully choose that lawyer or law firm you're going to be using for the transaction and the notary's office that will be handling the whole thing. Sometimes you'll need to meet with them and ask, hey, this is my situation, these are my documents, is this going to be a problem? And if they say yes, you might have to actually shop around until you find the right answer. Because if you choose wrong, it could be very, very expensive. Here's what happened. We've been spending a lot more time in the US this year helping Linda's mother. And we were in the US several months ago, back in the early part of the summer, when a realtor we've known for years asked on a private Facebook group for our complex if anyone was interested in selling a quarter condo unit. We both really love our condo in Mexico, but you know, I've been wanting to buy a house in Mexico. I just really want to have more space to do other things. You know, I feel a little confined in a condo. So Linda and I agreed to let the realtor show the condo and just see what happened. We set a fair price for the condo, but it would still give us a significant profit if somebody took it. And we told each other, you know what, we don't need to sell the condo. If we don't get this price, we'll just keep it because I don't feel like negotiating and it's not very expensive to keep anyway. Well, the first people who saw it via a video showing that the realtor did decided to buy it. And they agreed to the asking price. So we were like, okay, I guess we just sold our condo. The next thing you know, we're signing documents via email through DocuSign, and this thing is in motion. I've been blogging about Mexico since 2015, and in that time, I've met dozens of real estate lawyers and notaries, and I do have my favorites. Those are the ones that I tend to recommend to other people when they ask me, hey, who should I go with? Anyway, I didn't go with any of those. The reason was that we were still in the US, and the realtor said that she already had a law firm that she did business with, you know, regularly. And that law firm already had the buyer's documents as well. Now, at that time, we thought we were still going to go through a notary's office that we were familiar with and liked. It's the same notary we use for our wills, things like that. But later on in the process, we learned that the law firm decided to go with another notary, and we were not familiar with them at all. So we flew down to Mexico to collect our personal belongings from the condo and to get it ready for sale. We sold it with everything in it, so that part wasn't too hard. We personally met with the lawyer who was handling the sale. At that time, we gave the lawyer all of the documents that he requested, copies of our passports, copies of our permanent resident cards, bills in my name, especially that CFE or electric bill, proof that we had paid the property taxes, and he looked over all of it and said, yeah, you're going to qualify for the capital gains, no problema. We hung around Mexico for a couple of weeks, seeing our friends, just enjoying life, and then we headed back to Florida because Linda had to take her mother to some doctor's appointments. We'd only been back in Florida a few days when we received a bill in an email that said that we owed $30,000 in taxes as a part of this transaction. So Linda immediately calls the lawyer and says, hey, what is this tax bill? What's going on here? And he says, you know what? Although you have all of these bills in your name and bank accounts in your name, things like that, nothing is linked to your Mexican tax number known as an RFC. When we checked all these documents, there was a tax number on them, but it was the generic tax number or RFC for foreigners. They give that to people who don't have a tax number at the time, you know, that they're opening an account or doing something else. And at the time we opened those accounts and got our utilities and everything, we didn't have an RFC number yet. We were residents, we had other things like a CURP, which is a alphanumeric population identifier, but we didn't have a tax number. This sort of thing is actually pretty common with foreigners because you'll get your resident card first, and then you'll get that CURP, And then you'll start doing things like opening accounts and setting up your utilities, but you have to apply separately for an RFC. Well, nowadays, when you open a bank account, they ask for an RFC right away. But when we did all this back in 2015, it really wasn't a big deal. Well, after about 3 years in Mexico, I finally applied for our RFCs online because I knew that we would need them one day when we sold the property, but I never thought to add them to all of my existing utilities bills and my bank account. It just didn't even occur to me. If you've been watching my videos, you know that I'm a pretty precise person, especially with laws and regulations. So you might be asking yourself, well, why didn't you think to add these to all your accounts, Paul? Well, that's because I'd never heard of it before, and the law doesn't say it's necessary. You see, this is one of those notary interpretations I was telling you about. So what does the law say exactly? Well, I'm going to show you this briefly because I don't want you to go to sleep. But we're going to be looking at El Reglamento de la Ley del Impuesto sobre la Renta, which is the regulation for the income tax law. Specifically, we're going to be looking at Article 155. This is the article that's going to come into play when we're going to have to prove that this is our home address. Now, the first thing on the list here is a voter ID card, which we do not have because we're not citizens of Mexico. So we're going to move right to number 2. And in number 2, we're going to have to show fiscal proof that we've paid our electric bill or CFE bill or our home phone, which we have 6 years of those documents. Or number 3, show the status of accounts issued by financial institutions like banks or from credit card companies that are not run by banks. Now, this next section is super important, and this is what I'm talking about. It says that the documentation that I just mentioned must be in the name of the contributor, and that is the tax resident, their spouse, or a relative in direct descension or ascension. There is no mention in here that the RFC cannot be the generic one, which is common with foreigners, or anything else like that. This is an interpretation. I say it's an interpretation because I reached out to other real estate lawyers that said, no, it's not necessary for those to match. That is probably something that notary is doing just to, cross the T's and dot all the I's. That's an internal thing for them. It's not uniform across all the notaries. So by this point, I'm just thoroughly pissed off and I'm frustrated and I'm just really mad at myself for not following my own advice and going with the notary offices that I'm familiar with because I've never heard of this happening at those places. So I asked the lawyer what we can do, and he says, you know what? We can call down to CFE, the electric company, and tell them to add your RFC to your electric bill, and we'll use that as proof. So I said, okay, so if we add it, then can I just request an older bill with that number on there? And he says, no, it doesn't work like that because those facturas have already been issued. We have to wait until the next one. And I said, that's still 2 months away, well after our closing date. And he's like, well, I don't know. Now, I know there's already some folks watching this video who are looking for their CFE bill to see if it has their RFC on it, and they're freaking out. It's not easy to find. When you go to your CFE bill, come all the way down to the barcode, and there's a line right above it. It'll be in here. Your big name up here for 6 years, that part didn't count. That little line right here is what can cost you $30,000. By this point in our story, we are pretty screwed. In fact, the only way out of this is to request an extension from the buyers, which involves getting their consent, signing amended contracts, etc. Thank goodness the buyers turned out to be awesome and understanding people. They're actually a couple from the US, and they said, you know what? Take as much time as you need, no problem. The process just dragged on, and we ended up signing 2 extensions before it was over, and we could get all the documents and the fiscal proof necessary to get our whole $30,000 back. From the time we sold to when we finally closed was about 3 months. We definitely learned a lot along the way. The biggest thing I learned was to, again, follow my own advice and go with your gut and do what you know is right. Man, I'm still kicking myself about this whole thing. I hope this video helps others when the time comes to sell your property. And if you liked the video, if you can give it a like, that just really helps me out with the whole YouTube algorithm that I'm still learning. Until next time, hasta luego.